For the first time in 2,000 years, an American has been elected pope. But how did we get here? From wartime leaders to reformers and reluctant resignations, the last century of papal history is filled with powerful stories. Let's uncover the surprising journey of the modern papacy and the men who shaped it. Pope St. Pius X, August 4th, 1903, August 20th, 1914. Let's take a look at one of the most influential popes of the 20th century, Pope Pius X, a man whose roots were as humble as his heart was devoted. Born as Giuseppe Melchiorre Sarto on June 2, 1835, in a small village in northern Italy, Pius X came from a modest background. His father was a postman, and young Giuseppe knew the meaning of hard work early on. He was ordained a priest in 1858, and from there, his rise through the church was steady. He became Bishop of Mantua, then was appointed Patriarch of Venice, gaining a reputation for being deeply spiritual, approachable, and fiercely committed to the church's traditions. In 1903, after the death of Pope Leo XIII, a conclave was held to elect a new pontiff. It lasted 5 days, with 62 cardinals in attendance. Although Cardinal Mariano Rampolla was the favorite, his candidacy was blocked, allegedly due to opposition from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. On the 7th ballot, Sarto was elected with the required 2/3 majority, becoming Pope Pius X. His papacy left a strong mark on church history. In 1904, he issued the Apostolic Constitution, Vacante Sede Apostolica, which firmly stated that civil governments could no longer meddle in papal elections, a bold move that protected the church's independence. Pius X also made headlines by encouraging children to receive communion at a younger age, believing early access to the Eucharist would deepen their spiritual lives. And when disaster struck, like the 1908 Messina earthquake, he responded with compassion and action, sending aid to those affected. As World War I loomed, his health began to fail, and he passed away in 1914, leaving behind a legacy of reform, humility, and unwavering faith. Pope Benedict XV, September 3, 1914, January 22, 1922. Now let's talk about a pope who stepped into the spotlight at one of the darkest moments in modern history, Pope Benedict XV. He was born Giacomo della Chiesa on November 21, 1854, in Genoa, Italy. Though he came from an aristocratic family, Giacomo chose a path of service over privilege. He studied both law and theology, earning a reputation as a brilliant scholar and a dedicated priest. Over time, he rose through the church's ranks and was appointed Archbishop of Bologna, then made a cardinal in 1914. That same year, following the death of Pope Pius X, a papal conclave was called. 57 cardinals gathered, and after 3 days and 10 ballots, Giacomo della Chiesa was elected pope, taking the name Benedict XV. His election came just weeks after the start of World War I, a global catastrophe unlike anything the world had ever seen. Though he had no power to stop the war, Benedict XV made it his mission to promote peace and ease suffering. He called the war a senseless slaughter and tried multiple times to broker peace between the fighting nations, though his proposals were largely ignored. But what truly set him apart was his compassionate action. He organized relief efforts for wounded soldiers, arranged prisoner exchanges, and even helped feed civilians suffering from starvation, regardless of which side they were on. In 1917, amid the chaos of war, he made a lasting mark on the church by issuing a new code of canon law, a sweeping reform that organized and modernized church law for the first time in centuries. He died in 1922 from pneumonia, worn down by years of spiritual leadership during one of humanity's greatest crises. To this day, Benedict XV is remembered as a pope of peace, charity, and legal reform, even if his pleas fell on deaf ears during the war. Pope Pius XI, February 6, 1922, February 10, 1939. Let's turn now to Pope Pius XI, a man of deep intellect and surprising courage who guided the Catholic Church through a time of political turmoil and transformation. He was born Ambrogio Damiano Achille Ratti on May 31, 1857, in the Lombardy region of northern Italy. From an early age, Ratti showed a love for learning. He became a respected scholar, especially known for his work with ancient church manuscripts and texts. But he wasn't just a bookish academic. He also had a sharp mind for diplomacy. He served as the apostolic nuncio to Poland, navigating the tensions of a post-World War I Europe, and later became Archbishop of Milan, one of the most important dioceses in Italy. When Pope Benedict XV died in 1922, the Church gathered once again to choose a new leader. The conclave lasted 5 days, and it took 14 ballots before a decision was made. Ratti emerged as a compromise candidate, someone who could appeal to both the traditional and reform-minded factions within the Church. Interestingly, American cardinals weren't able to make it in time to vote, simply because of how long ocean travel took in those days. As Pope, Pius XI made history with one of the most significant agreements of the 20th century, the Lateran Treaty, signed with Benito Mussolini in 1929. This treaty officially recognized Vatican City as an independent sovereign state, resolving a long-standing conflict between the Church and the Italian government that had lingered since the 19th century. But Pius XI didn't stop there. As fascism gained momentum in Europe, he stood his ground. He spoke out against totalitarian ideologies and firmly defended the Church's right to oversee its own educational institutions, even as regimes tried to tighten control over all aspects of public life. He died in 1939, just months before World War II erupted. Remembered for both his diplomatic skill and moral courage, Pius XI was a pope who understood the delicate balance between faith and politics, and wasn't afraid to speak out when it mattered most. Pope Pius XII, March 2, 1939, October 9, 1958. Next up is Pope Pius XII, a deeply complex figure who led the Catholic Church during one of the most devastating chapters in human history, World War II. He was born Eugenio Pacelli in 1876, into a noble and well-connected Italian family with strong ties to the Vatican. From the start, Pacelli was a man of intellect and diplomacy. He was trained in law and theology, and quickly rose through the Church's ranks. By the early 20th century, he was serving as nuncio to Germany, where he witnessed firsthand the brewing tensions that would eventually explode into war. Later, he became Secretary of State, essentially the Vatican's top diplomat, before being elected Pope. When Pope Pius XI passed away in 1939, a conclave was called. It was remarkably swift. Just 2 ballots were needed, and on March 2, 1939, with 63 cardinals voting, Eugenio Pacelli was elected and took the name Pius XII. His papacy began just months before Hitler invaded Poland, plunging the world into war. Pius XII faced an agonizing challenge: how to guide the Church and promote peace without drawing retaliation that could cost lives. While his public stance appeared neutral, behind the scenes, he was anything but passive. He worked through secret channels to assist Jews and other victims of Nazi persecution, providing shelter in monasteries, issuing false baptismal papers, and directing aid where he could. He also took to the airwaves, delivering nearly 200 radio addresses to urge peace, human dignity, and Christian unity across a shattered Europe. Pius XII died in 1958, having led the Church through a time of unprecedented global trauma. Though his legacy is still debated by historians, many agree on one thing: he was a pope who carried the moral weight of a broken world on his shoulders, often in silence, but always with purpose. Pope St. John XXIII, October 28, 1958, June 3, 1963. Next, we meet a pope who surprised the world, not with grand power plays, but with his deep humility and boundless warmth. He was born Angelo Roncalli on November 25, 1881, into a large farming family in northern Italy. Despite his humble roots, Roncalli went on to live an extraordinary life. He served as a military chaplain during World War I, later as a papal diplomat, and eventually became the beloved Cardinal of Venice. When Pope Pius XII died in 1958, a new conclave convened. It lasted 4 days, and while many thought the next pope would be Cardinal Giovanni Battista Montini, the future Paul VI, it was the gentle and unassuming Roncalli who was elected instead. Upon accepting, he simply said with a smile, "I am called John." That moment alone told the world something had changed. People instantly took to him, drawn by his approachable nature and grandfatherly charm. But don't let that warm smile fool you. Pope John XXIII came to make history. In 1962, just a few years into his papacy, he called the Second Vatican Council, or Vatican II, one of the most important events in modern church history. His goal was simple, yet revolutionary: to update the church and open dialogue with the modern world. The council went on to reshape everything from the language of the Mass to interfaith relations and religious freedom. Sadly, John XXIII died of cancer in 1963 before the council concluded. But his legacy endured. He is often remembered as the Good Pope, a man who reminded the world that kindness, vision, and courage could walk hand in hand. He didn't just change church policy, he changed hearts. Pope Paul VI, June 21, 1963, August 6, 1978. Let's now look at Pope Paul VI, a man who didn't start the revolution, but made sure it didn't lose its way. Born Giovanni Battista Montini in 1897 in northern Italy, he came from a devout Catholic family and was marked early on by a blend of intellect and humility. Before becoming pope, Montini served as the Archbishop of Milan, one of Italy's most important and active dioceses. He was known for his pastoral care and deep concern for workers and the poor, qualities that would shape his papacy. In 1963, following the death of Pope John XXIII, a conclave was held. It lasted 3 days, with 80 cardinals voting. Giovanni Montini was elected as the next pope, taking the name Paul VI, a nod to Saint Paul, the tireless missionary who spread Christianity across the world. His election came during the Second Vatican Council, a transformative moment for the Church that John XXIII had begun. Paul VI took on the monumental task of bringing that council to completion, navigating a delicate balance between tradition and modernization. And that's where Paul VI left his mark. He simplified papal ceremonies, removing some of the regal elements that once made the papacy seem distant. He also established the Synod of Bishops, giving local church leaders a stronger voice and encouraging shared responsibility in guiding the church. Among his most notable reforms was introducing mandatory retirement at age 75 for bishops and setting the age limit at 80 for cardinals who vote in papal conclaves, changes that brought a more practical and orderly system to church governance. Paul VI passed away on August 6, 1978, after 15 years as pope. He's remembered as a quiet, determined shepherd, a man who stayed the course through controversy and helped the church find its footing in the modern world. Pope John Paul I, August 26 to September 28, 1978. Now we come to one of the shortest papacies in history, but one that still left a deep impression on hearts around the world. Pope John Paul I, born Albino Luciani in 1912, was an Italian from the Veneto region, known for his gentle nature, sharp intellect, and down-to-earth charm. Before becoming pope, he served as Patriarch of Venice, where he gained a reputation as a humble and pastoral bishop, someone who walked among his people, not above them. When Pope Paul VI passed away in 1978, the cardinals gathered for a conclave that would soon surprise the world. On August 26, 1978, Luciani was elected pope and chose a name no one had ever used before, John Paul I. It was a heartfelt tribute to both John XXIII, who had inspired him with warmth and vision, and Paul VI, whose reforms he deeply respected. This dual name symbolized his intent to continue their legacy, balancing tradition with renewal. From the moment he stepped out onto the balcony at St. Peter's, people took to him instantly. His smile was radiant. His manner was kind. He refused the traditional papal coronation and chose a simpler installation ceremony, signaling that his would be a more pastoral, approachable papacy. But tragically, just 33 days later, Pope John Paul I died suddenly in his sleep. The world was stunned. His death, on September 28, 1978, sparked grief and many questions. Though his time was short, his message was clear. The Church needed compassion, simplicity, and a shepherd's heart. In just over a month, he reminded the world that joy and humility have a place even in the highest office. Pope St. John Paul II, October 16, 1978, April 2, 2005. Few figures of the 20th century captured hearts and headlines like Pope John Paul II. Born Karol Józef Wojtyła on May 18, 1920 in Wadowice, Poland, he grew up in the shadow of war and loss. He lost his mother as a child, his brother as a teen, and his father before he turned 21. But through those hardships, his faith only grew stronger. Before becoming pope, Wojtyła was a philosopher, playwright, priest, and Archbishop of Krakow. He quietly resisted communist oppression in Poland, speaking out for human dignity and religious freedom. His courage and intellect caught the attention of church leaders around the world. In October 1978, following the sudden death of Pope John Paul I, the Church entered its second conclave that year. It took 8 ballots to reach a decision. With votes split among Italian candidates, Wojtyła emerged as a compromise choice, and a historic one. On October 16, 1978, he became the first non-Italian pope in 455 years, taking the name John Paul II. What followed was an epic papacy that spanned more than 26 years, one of the longest in church history. He became known as the Pilgrim Pope, traveling to 129 countries, reaching out to the faithful, the curious, and even those who opposed the Church. He created World Youth Day, inspiring new generations. He canonized and beatified more saints than any pope before him, spotlighting examples of holiness from every corner of the globe. He also played a crucial role in the fall of communism, especially in his native Poland, where his presence emboldened the people and weakened the grip of the Soviet regime. John Paul II stood firm on traditional church teachings, but always with a message of hope, human dignity, and unwavering love. He died on April 2, 2005, mourned by millions. Even today, his legacy continues to ripple across the world. Pope Benedict XVI, April 19, 2005, February 28, 2013. Next, we come to Pope Benedict XVI, a man known as much for his brilliant mind as for the humility of his final act. He was born Joseph Ratzinger on April 16, 1927, in a small Bavarian town in Germany. Growing up during the rise and fall of Nazi Germany, Ratzinger saw firsthand how ideology could distort truth. That experience deeply shaped his lifelong commitment to faith, reason, and moral clarity. Over the decades, he became one of the Church's most respected theologians, eventually rising to lead the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the Vatican's chief office for defending Catholic teaching. After the death of John Paul II in 2005, 115 cardinals entered the conclave. It took just 4 ballots to elect Ratzinger as Pope, clear proof of the respect he commanded. On April 19, 2005, he took the name Benedict XVI, honoring both Benedict XV, who worked for peace during World War I, and Saint Benedict, the father of Western monasticism. As Pope, Benedict XVI focused on strengthening tradition, upholding doctrinal truth, and addressing the challenges of secularism in a rapidly changing world. His scholarly background brought a thoughtful and measured tone to the papacy. But his time as Pope wasn't without controversy. He also faced the painful challenge of addressing abuse scandals within the Church. Then, in a moment that stunned the world, Benedict did something no pope had done in over 600 years. In February 2013, citing his age and declining health, he resigned the papacy, stepping aside to let a younger man lead. It was an act of humility, courage, and realism. Benedict XVI passed away in 2022 at the age of 95. He leaves behind a legacy of intellectual depth, gentle leadership, and a decision that reshaped the modern papacy. Pope Francis, March 13, 2013, April 21, 2025. Finally, we come to Pope Francis, a man whose papacy broke barriers, touched hearts, and reminded the world of the power of simple compassion. Born Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Argentina in 1936, he grew up in a working-class family in Buenos Aires. Before becoming a priest, he studied chemistry and even worked as a janitor. His path to the papacy was grounded in humility and service. As Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he chose to live in a small apartment, cook his own meals, and take the bus to work. Quiet signs of the man he would remain, even after taking the world's highest religious office. In March 2013, after the surprise resignation of Pope Benedict XVI, 115 cardinals entered the conclave to choose a new leader. On the 5th ballot, Bergoglio was elected, and, when he stepped out onto the balcony of St. Peter's, he greeted the crowd simply and warmly. Taking the name Francis, he became the first pope from the Americas, the first Jesuit pope, and the first non-European pope in over 1,200 years. Francis quickly became known for his deep concern for the poor, reaching across religious lines and calling on the world to care for the earth, our common home. He often shunned luxury and called on church leaders to stay close to the people they served. He advocated fiercely for migrants, refugees, and those on the margins of society. His leadership style was one of listening, humility, and open dialogue, unafraid to wade into complex topics or challenge the Church to grow. On April 21, 2025, Pope Francis passed away at the age of 88 after battling pneumonia. His death marked the end of a deeply transformative era. To many, he wasn't just a pope. He was a pastor, a peacemaker, and a friend of the forgotten. Pope Leo XIV, the first American pope in 2,000 years of Catholic history. For the first time in 2,000 years, an American has been elected to the papacy. Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost, a man few outside ecclesiastical circles had heard of, emerged on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica on May 8th and quietly rewrote history. Now known as Pope Leo XIV, the 267th successor to St. Peter, he did not arrive with theatrical gestures or grand proclamations. Instead, he looked into the crowd below and offered just 3 words: peace to all. And in that simple, soft phrase, something shifted. There was no need for thunderous applause or orchestrated spectacle, just sincerity, rooted in decades of humble service far away from the marble corridors of the Vatican. What makes this moment even more profound is that, for generations, there existed a quiet but firm rule within the Vatican. No American should ever become pope. The logic was more symbolic than legal. How could the spiritual leader of 1.4 billion Catholics also hold citizenship from a nation so dominant in global affairs? The convergence of political and spiritual power was deemed too risky, too loaded with implication. Yet here we are. And the irony is rich, because Robert Prevost is perhaps the least American the Vatican could have chosen. Born in Chicago, Illinois, Prevost could have followed a well-worn path through U.S. diocesan politics or academic institutions, but instead, he went south, way south. He spent over 3 decades in Peru, serving in Trujillo, and later becoming the Bishop of Chiclayo. He lived among the poor, prayed with them, worked beside them, and became a part of their lives. To many Latin American clergy, he wasn't a foreign visitor. He was one of us. That sense of rootedness, of mission beyond borders, defined his life long before white smoke announced it to the world. What makes his rise even more compelling is how unexpected it was. He wasn't a Vatican insider in the traditional sense. He avoided media attention, declined interviews, and rarely made public statements. While others built public profiles, Prevost quietly built trust. He worked behind the scenes, and Pope Francis took notice. In 2023, Prevost was called back to Rome to lead one of the Church's most influential departments, the dicastery for bishops, responsible for appointing bishops across the globe. It was one of the clearest signs of trust from Pope Francis, who later appointed him president of the Pontifical Commission for Latin America, reinforcing his role as a bridge between cultures. But perhaps the most telling moment of Prevost's philosophy came in one of the most quietly revolutionary changes in modern church governance. Under his leadership, and with Pope Francis's blessing, 3 women were given voting rights in the bishop selection process, something that had never happened before. It was a move that signaled not just administrative change, but a deeper cultural shift toward inclusion, toward listening, toward shared responsibility. In a Vatican often seen as frozen in time, it was a breath of progress. And Prevost didn't boast about it. He just made it happen. Those who know him describe a man of gentle conviction. Former classmates from his seminary years recall someone always calm, always listening, with a wry sense of humor. In Chiclayo, he was known for sharing breakfast with local priests every morning after prayer, often chatting casually, always asking questions, always remembering names. There's something old-fashioned and deeply human about that kind of leadership. Not grand, not flashy, just consistent presence. So how did someone like this become pope? The answer, perhaps, lies in the very nature of what people are yearning for now. In a world filled with noise, division, conflict, and spectacle, perhaps the cardinals were looking for a different kind of leader. Someone who doesn't dominate the room, but elevates those around him. Someone who doesn't seek the spotlight, but shines it where it's needed most, on the suffering, the forgotten, the everyday faithful who hold the church together in silence. And that's what Prevost brings to the papacy. Not the ambition of empire, but the spirit of mission. Not the pursuit of power, but the pursuit of peace. In many ways, he is a natural heir to Pope Francis, not just because of shared ideology, but because of shared geography of the heart. Both men know the poverty of the barrios, the warmth of community celebrations, the theology of presence. They understand that holiness is not found in vaulted ceilings alone, but in crowded kitchens, in makeshift altars, in whispered prayers said in fear and in faith. To call Pope Leo XIV simply the first American pope is true, but incomplete. Because he is more than a national figure, he is, as one theologian put it, the Pope for all the Americas. His life has been a bridge between North and South, between institutional structure and grassroots faith. His support from Latin American cardinals wasn't political, it was personal. They know him, they trust him. And perhaps most importantly, they see in him a man who can carry the Church not just into the future, but into the margins, where Christ has always dwelled. And now, as global crises mount, climate change, migration, war, economic inequality, the Church once again finds itself at a crossroads. In Pope Leo XIV, there is hope that the Church will not retreat into rigid authority or soft diplomacy, but will engage the world boldly yet humbly. His life in Peru gave him first-hand knowledge of how global policies hit the poorest the hardest. His work in Rome gave him insight into how change can be enacted slowly, strategically, and with lasting impact. But most of all, his words, those first words, remind us that he hasn't changed. He hasn't forgotten who he is, and he hasn't abandoned the posture of a servant, even as he steps into the shoes of the fisherman. Peace to all. Simple, sincere, unshakably grounded. In those three words lies the promise of a papacy not built on politics or pageantry, but on presence. So here we are, at the beginning of something new. Not just a new pope, but a new tone, a new way of leading, a quieter voice in a louder world, a shepherd who knows the smell of his sheep, a man who has chosen, again and again, to walk alongside the forgotten, now called to guide the faithful. And maybe, just maybe, in this moment of global noise, that quiet voice is exactly what we've been waiting for all along. From humble missionaries to global reformers, each pope of the last century has shaped the Church in profound ways. And now, with Pope Leo XIV, a new chapter begins. What legacy will he leave? Only time will tell. But one thing's certain, the story of the papacy is far from over. As always, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and share Who Remembers with someone you know.